Hello and welcome to the 6th episode of A Woman Robbed, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is, where we talk about actresses who may have come close to earning Oscar nominations, but were ultimately overlooked or omitted, or for one reason or another just didn't have the votes to make it into the final lineup, and discussing why they may have deserved to get in and why they ultimately didn't. Each episode has its own theme with a double feature like this, and this week we are talking about an instance where one actress had Oscar buzz on multiple occasions and even earned some precursor nominations maybe for both, but didn't receive Oscar nominations ultimately. And joining me today to help me break down one of the biggest examples here is someone who is back on the show in record time. I had him on the Best Actress series just 1 month ago, talking about the Best Actress lineup of 1973. Normally, I wouldn't book someone again so soon, but I had made a promise to him that if we were ever to talk about this particular person on A Woman Robbed, that he would be my guest. So here he is already. Writer of his blog, The Awards Connection, writer at Awards Watch. Welcome back, Andrew Carden.
Kevin, how are you?
I'm great. We were chatting beforehand. Not much new has happened in the month since you've been on, so
Indeed,
but
indeed.
but I'm very excited to have you on talking about an actress that I've known for so long that you have loved and admired. So very
Yes,
excited to
I'm
have you on
I'm
here.
so glad that Mia could bring us back together in record time.
Yes, truly. But yeah, let's get right into it. So I presented to my patrons here at And the Runner-Up Is a list of 15 actresses who had Oscar buzz in Best Actress on multiple occasions but didn't get nominations. And just to recap the choices, we had Amy Adams, Annette Bening, Emily Blunt, Viola Davis, Faye Dunaway, Mia Farrow, Sally Field, Scarlett Johansson, Diane Keaton, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Meg Ryan, Gene Simmons, Barbara Streisand, Emma Thompson, and Kathleen Turner. And the winner was Mia Farrow. And I will say Annette Bening was very close to winning, like within 1 or 2 votes. But once again, she has to be a bridesmaid for now.
To be fair, at least Annette has Oscar nominations, unlike Mia
That
Farrow.
is probably maybe a deciding factor for a lot of people in wanting us to talk about her here. And with Mia Farrow, it's interesting because she had Oscar buzz and like precursor nominations for more than 2 performances. So there were others that we could have talked about, like John and Mary, Broadway Danny Rose, Hannah and Her Sisters, Alice. But the 2 performances that my patrons wanted me to cover the most from her were Rosemary's Baby, of course, and The Purple Rose of Cairo. So that's what we'll be talking about today. But before we talk about those movies and those performances, Andrew, we've talked about Mia Farrow before, but I love if you could just maybe tell the listeners what it is that you really kind of respond to in her work.
Yeah, so on our last podcast, we talked about how Barbara Streisand was a big part of my upbringing and just kind of a constant on the TV because my parents watched all of her movies. Oddly enough, it's a very similar case with Mia Farrow. Both of my parents were huge horror buffs, so Rosemary's Baby was pretty much an annual revisit, and it was always on the TV come October. And it's a film that I pretty quickly came to love. But even more than that, my father actually owned the entire Woody Allen collection on VHS that MGM put out, which was
Oh,
something like basically all of his films from the 70s and 80s. And those are always on. And so, well, it took me a while to kind of get a hang of those. And it really wasn't until college that I became kind of a fan of those films. Mia Farrow was still somebody who was just constantly on TV, my parents watching movies with her, and just somebody who I grew up with. She's somebody who I came to really love and appreciate as somebody who could tackle just about any sort of role. Performance in Rosemary's Baby, for instance, is so different tonally, stylistically than her performance in The Purple Rose of Cairo. And in each of these films that she had Oscar buzz for, she's really playing such a unique character. She's really a quite a chameleon as an actress. And when I became interested in the award season and the Oscars and looking back, I was, of course, shocked to realize that Mia Farrow had never been nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. And what made it all the more perplexing was that you had a film like Rosemary's Baby winning an acting Oscar. You had Hannah and Her Sisters, for instance, a Best Picture nominee. You had all of these Woody Allen pictures getting just constant recognition. And somehow this leading lady was always off to the sidelines, even though she would surface at the Golden Globes, at BAFTA. And it's to this day kind of perplexing looking back, especially given just how bananas AMPUS was for the Woody Allen films in that era. So I think it's really great just to, spend some time to appreciate this amazing actress who delivered so many fantastic and really underrated performances. And I think she's an actress who doesn't get discussed as much as she should, perhaps because she took a long break from acting. After the Woody Allen pictures, she wasn't in a whole lot. And I don't think really did a major picture until I think that remake of The Omen, I want to say. So I think she sort of was somebody who really wasn't in the headlines at a certain point and somebody who was away from the big screen. So I don't know if she's somebody who today's young film buffs really talk about that much. If they do, it's perhaps in the context of all the controversies surrounding Woody Allen. But I really think that it's long overdue that folks take a look back at her career and at these absolutely wonderful performances that she gave during this era, from Rosemary's Baby, I think all the way through Husbands and Wives, and just one incredible performance after the other. For my money, she might just be the most purely underrated actress to ever grace the screen. And, if I were to put together a list of my top 10 favorite actresses of all time, I think she'd probably be among them. I think she's that great. So I think I'm going to have such a ball just discussing these two fantastic performances with you. And
Yeah.
I hope that this podcast will encourage folks to seek out the rest of her great performances too.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, hard to follow that up. Um, just a random aside, speaking to like younger people, did you happen to catch her on her show, The Watcher,
I did not. I
which is on Netflix? The
yeah,
newer, yeah,
my wife actually did watch. The negative response to it kind of
yeah,
kept me away,
me
but
too. Was
she
just
had met
curious.
that Mia was one of the better parts of
Well, there you go. See, she still got it. Um,
it.
yeah, but yeah, for me, like Mia Farrow is such a fascinating screen presence, just in how she's able to really just provide quite a bit of depth, even when on the surface you may not see that sort of depth at times. And I find that there's just a very light and sort of feminine quality to her often in her roles. But if you really, watch her and you lean in and see what she's doing, I think there's a real intelligence there to what she's able to express, in her body language and her expressions, and making really great use of those eyes, which I think, are very expressive. I don't see her as a kind of like grande dame type that I tend to love in my actresses. So she may not be one of my absolute faves, but over time I've really come to appreciate her subtlety, and especially in these roles, this kind of fundamental kind of earnestness that to me doesn't come across as like corny. She really finds the right frequency in a lot of these performances. I do understand why some may not respond to her as well because of that subtlety, but she just always has read to me as just very thoughtful and taking her craft seriously, but also still having that sort of almost like a buoyant energy maybe when the role calls for it. And these are two very different films that we're going to talk about today, but I do think that there is sort of a through line here that maybe we can get into as we talk about both of them. But yeah, I'm very excited to have you here with me. I didn't even know you were that big of a fan. Like, I knew you were a fan, but like top 10 of all time, that's pretty big. So shall we get into arguably her most iconic role first in Rosemary's Baby?
Yeah, for sure.
You could hear them singing through the wall. Guy, my husband, Guy, said it was Dr. Shand, one of these people, playing a recorder. Now, how did he know it was Dr. Shand unless he was there with them? They're very clever people. They planned everything right from the beginning. They probably made some sort of deal with Guy. They gave him success, and he promised them our baby to use in their rituals. I know this sounds crazy, but I've got books here. Look.
Well, to give a little background on Mia Farrow first, as we tend to do on this show when we're talking about a new actress, she is the daughter of show business parents, Maureen O'Sullivan, the actress, and John Farrow, the director. She moved around a lot as a kid, and she eventually made her way into modeling, and she took on these smaller roles in film. She had a series regular role on the TV version of Peyton Place, in the role that Diana Varsity plays in the film. And then, during that time, she marries Frank Sinatra and leaves the show. And then, Rosemary's Baby is actually her first leading role. But, considering how great the part is, there were a lot of actresses in the mix to potentially play Rosemary, including Tuesday Weld, who was the first choice, and then the director Roman Polanski's then wife, Sharon Tate. There was Jane Fonda, of course, Julie Christie, Elizabeth Hartman, all people we've covered on this show before, Joanna Pettit, but Mia gets the part, and apparently there was a turning point in her relationship with Frank Sinatra, who broke it off with her after she agreed to do the film. But Rosemary's Baby, it's based on the acclaimed book of the same name by Ira Levin, and it's about a young couple, Rosemary and Guy, played by Mia Farrow and John Cassavetes, who move into a New York apartment, and they meet their eccentric elderly neighbors who take a strange liking to them. And Rosemary eventually becomes pregnant after a disturbing sexual ritual, and she eventually comes to suspect that her neighbors and others around her have ulterior motives in their interest in her baby and may possibly be Satanists. Let's talk Mia Farrow's first big breakout role here in Rosemary's Baby. Andrew, I know that obviously you're also a big horror fan, and this is one of the sort of defining horror movies of all time. Just curious to explore more of your relationship with Rosemary's Baby and Mia Farrow's performance.
Yeah, so I think when I was younger, I honestly probably thought this was a kind of boring film just because it didn't have the gore and a lot of the sort of in-your-face intensity of something like The Exorcist or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or other this wasn't a 70s picture, but it's right in that era of horror. It really wasn't until later that I came to really appreciate Rosemary's Baby, and now I really consider it among my all-time favorite horror films. And I think integral to that success is Mia Farrow, who is, of course, the heart and soul of this film. You had Ruth Gordon obviously winning the Oscar for this, and she's wonderful and very memorable. But I think that Mia Farrow is just such a tour de force in this film. And it's a performance that really runs the gamut in terms of emotions, in terms of tone. Toward the beginning of this film, Mia Farrow is so hip, she's so fashionable, she's so sexy, and she has really this very easygoing and lived-in chemistry with John Cassavetes. And the way the film opens, you could almost picture the two of them being in sort of a lighthearted romantic comedy. They're just so perfect together, and they just seem as though they could just excel in really just about any genre. Of course, as the film progresses and becomes much more unsettling, and Rosemary goes through this wild journey, it becomes a very different performance, one filled with horror and anguish and confusion as this character finds herself being just surrounded by gaslighting from her husband, from her neighbors, from her doctors, from everybody around her. It's just such a powerful and involving and unforgettable performance, for sure among the best in its genre. It's a performance that has more than stood the test of time, and it's a performance that's very different than a lot of her later work. I think that it's a much more intense performance. And it's just such a riveting turn from start to finish. And it's critical to the film's success because without Mia Farrow and without all of the strength that she gives on screen, this just wouldn't be the same. So I think it's one of the all-time greats.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, this was my first introduction to Mia Farrow whenever I first saw this. And it's such a fantastic part for any actress because, you know, you get to play so many layers and really build this great arc of her gradually sort of realizing the truth of it, the horror of it all. And yeah, I mean, just to talk about the sort of surface level of it for a minute, Mia Farrow has those big eyes and the sort of petite frame that really lends itself to horror. So just visually, I think she works really well in the part. But what makes this, I think, such an iconic and enduring performance is her ability to just provide so much sympathy to it. Because, like, in the beginning, she has that dainty, sort of refined quality, kind of almost like an Audrey Hepburn in her very, like, affable screen persona, but also is also very, you know, direct when she needs to be, like, when they have that first night in the apartment together, and she's just like, hey, let's make love. It's very charming. And she, you know, really fits into the mold of the sort of young, happy wife who's attractive and friendly and very status quo, just relatable kind of character. But then with Ruth Gordon's character, Minnie, and her sort of pushiness, her coming to her apartment unannounced and giving her the necklace, you start to see this very real sense of discomfort in her. But, you know, still is trying to keep up appearances of wanting to be polite and not offend, even when she's not really comfortable. And obviously that discomfort becomes much more explicit as the film goes on. But, you know, that early part I do tend to sort of forget about when I'm thinking of Rosemary's Baby, since it's not as flashy, I guess. But she makes it very easy to root for. And, you know, I can't speak to the experience of being a woman, but a lot of women have talked about, you know, like what it's like to navigate the world and society and how it's all set up, where there's always that little sense of fear that if you say the wrong thing or you behave in a way that people don't like, that there can be some real repercussions. And I think she kind of taps into that fear and trying her best to pretend like everything's normal and that she's fine, even when, like, it's really not, you know?
No, absolutely. And I think that, you know, there's an unsettling sense fairly early on, you know, when she meets the neighbor who eventually falls to her death. You know, it's such a fascinating evolution because she's so carefree and enchanting and charismatic toward the start of the film. And it's very subtle how just the unsettling nature, because even though the Ruth Gordon and Sidney Blackmer characters are initially portrayed as sort of like these sort of bumbling next door neighbors that could easily just be on like a sitcom, there's still something very nuanced and eerie about their personas. And I think that Mia Farrow is able to really convey how she can really kind of, I think, see through them fairly early on and can sense that there's something amiss right away. But I think that the way that Mia Farrow conveys it is just so subtle. And I just, how her rapport with the neighbors and with everybody else, initially it's one of annoyance and she's just kind of sick of the busybodies, but gradually, but very quietly, you know, she senses that there's real danger among her and there's really nobody that she can trust. And the one person that she feels that she can trust ends up being a doctor who screws her over. And I think that, you know, these are experiences that countless women have faced.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, and then after that incident happens where she's drugged by Minnie and is basically forced into sex with this demon creature, you know, I feel like she plays the disorientation of that very accurately. And again, her trying not to cause a fuss and still keeping kind of an even tone with her line delivery, but her body language is definitely suggesting a lot of confusion and turmoil inside, especially when her husband just straight up gaslights her about like why she has the scratch marks on her back.
Right.
You know, that, and like just all the scenes we get of her when she's just lying in bed and we see her kind of lost in thought, just like trying to figure out what it is that's happening. She knows that something's wrong, but she can't really point her finger to exactly what it is, but she knows that something's off. I find that that's probably like a very tricky thing to actually communicate as an actress, but she really, really does it so subtly and so beautifully. And I think that her age, you know, being so young at the time, it's even more remarkable knowing that this is her first leading role, and her ability to communicate all of that is, yeah, it's remarkable.
It is. It's pretty amazing, just because I think that Jane Fonda would have been the obvious choice for this. And I think that Mia Farrow towards the beginning of the film kind of rings of Jane Fonda and something like Barefoot in the Park, you know, and some of the lighter fare that she was doing. But I think that Mia Farrow brings a real vulnerability to Rosemary that Jane Fonda perhaps wouldn't have been able to capture. Not that Jane Fonda isn't an amazing actress, she is, but Mia Farrow is just such a perfect and inspired piece of casting for this. And I mean, I think that she's, even when she's just doing voiceovers, like during the scene where she's assaulted, and you know, this is no dream, this is really happening. I think that in another actress's hands, that could have been played a little over the top or even as camp.
Oh yeah.
But the way that she's able to do it is just so terrifying, and just a sense of helplessness. And then the morning after, such a crazy sense of confusion. She just looks so fragile and vulnerable in bed, and she certainly isn't helped by the man that she's living with. It's just, it becomes such a heartbreaking performance at this point, you know, merely, you know, a half hour after you were just so infatuated and just loving this woman and this couple and their experience in New York City. Because it's a far different experience than, you know, the likes of Jane Fonda and all of these other actresses who were in sort of these New York City films of the era that were much lighter, like Neil Simon fare.
Thank you for listening to this preview of A Woman Robbed, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerupis and become a patron. Only $3 a month will get you access to bonus episodes and early access to regular episodes. Thank you so much for your consideration.